Hello and welcome to our second part about growing tomatoes. It's been a little bit of time since our last clip, which I think was the beginning of May. It's now the end of July, and as you can probably see, the crop has come on very well. We did have some problems early on with our compost, which I mentioned in our June update on the nursery, in that we actually had some contaminated bark that we used in the compost, which caused some problems and meant that we actually had to do an awful lot of repotting and bits and pieces like that. But since then things have picked up, the crop is about on track, and now I'd just like to go through and talk about the bits and pieces you should be doing now, and what you should be doing until the end of the season with your tomatoes really. So the most important thing this time of year really is to keep on tying in. As you can see, there's quite a lot of extension growth here. Without tying into the cane or your support, this will eventually get too heavy, particularly when the flower truss actually forms fruit, and snap off. So the basics are the same as I think I mentioned in the first clip. Just tie in. I always try and leave a little bit of growth at the top rather than tying right up to here, because if you tie in too tight, you may actually find that the tomato will start growing and bowing out. So that's fine. I use string. String is my favourite for this. If you've got lots of tomatoes, you could use a magic toy like this, which is what's called a max tapener. I'll show you how it works, but I don't like them on the tomatoes, and of course, as Millie helps me and she cuts the strings, it's one of those fun things that we do together. So even though we use max tapeners on the nursery, I don't use them on the tomatoes. So good old string's fine. Make sure there's a good bit of movement there, and as I'll show you in just a moment, it's also worthwhile checking the rest of the ties on your tomato from previous tyings in, because obviously as the stem grows bigger, they can get a little bit tight. So this tomato is now tied in, but it's got some side shoots to come out. And I mentioned before, side shoots can be worrying because people can think a side shoot is there, and what it is in actual fact is a flower truss. But if you let them grow to this sort of length, so here's a flower truss, these will be the fruits, below it here is a side shoot, they really are quite obvious which is which. When they're this sort of size, we can just snap them out like that, and obviously the smaller, and I will go to there. I won't touch this top one here, even though I can see which one is flower and which is just going to be a side shoot, but I'll leave that as is. You also need to check right down the stem of the tomato, because they have an amazing habit of throwing fresh side shoots from where you've already been. So that's done, that's side shooted, that's tied in. That's what we need to be doing at this moment in time. When the tomato gets to the top of the cane, let's take this max tapener tie off now, otherwise Millie would get upset. And I'll get my string. Lost my string. Sorry. So moving on from tying in and side shooting, the next thing you have to remember is they're going to get to the top of the cane and carry on, which obviously you don't want. So I'll tie this tomato in as you would normally, and the next thing we have to do is stop it. Now stopping is exactly what we say, stops the top growth. And all you have to do, and for this I will use pair of secateurs, is decide where you're going to finish the tomato, and I'm going to leave this top truss on here. So I will go above the leaf above and just snip out with my secateurs. And that's now stopped. But a bit like the side shoots, which I'm just taking these out again on this one, it's not completely stopped, because once again it will grow again from there. So you'll actually end up having to take out the top again several times, but the main thing is that you've now decided that you've got, particularly on this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we've taken 10 trusses of fruits on this. This is sun gold, and we've put 10 trusses on this one. If we were on a larger tomato, something like an Abraham Lincoln, we'd probably be looking at about sort of 3 to 5. With Giant Delicious, you can actually go as low as 2 trusses, but the tomatoes are huge. But that's it for side shooting and stopping. So watering wise, we continue as we have been. We keep them just on the dry side of moist. They get a drink most days just after lunch. We try to let them dry out a little bit rather than keeping them soggy wet, because when they dry out, the fruit actually produces the sugar, and the sugar is the flavour. So keeping them wet all the time will ensure that you have nice fruits but with not a lot of flavour, a bit like your supermarket tomatoes that are grown on nutrient film technique and things like that. But obviously what we want is flavour, so let them dry down a little bit, the sugars will increase and the flavour will be far much better than you'd ever expect. Haven't done any feeding since these were potted up. As I said before in clip 1, with a good compost you shouldn't need to have to keep on feeding. Obviously we had issues with the compost this year, but nutrient wise it must be okay, because as you can see the tomatoes are pretty good. One thing we did do with these is we actually top up all the pots. If you may remember from clip 1, I actually left a good 2 or 3 inches in the top of the pots, which beginning of July we topped up with fresh compost. Tomatoes are stem rooting, which means that you could basically keep on filling up and they would throw roots out, and they've gone into that nice fresh compost and it's given them a real cheer up and sort of helps them through to the rest of the season. So that's watering dealt with, that's side shooting and stopping dealt with. So that's about it for cordon varieties. The only thing I do need to show you is about removing bottom strings, which I've got one over on the other side which I'll just show you in a second. But that's about it for cordons, very easy. So here we are actually back on the cordons again. The one thing I did miss, and as I said I'd come and show, is that obviously the earlier ties can actually start to cut in because the stem's grown so much. So when you are going through your tomatoes and checking, it is important to check from the bottom, and any that are getting a little bit tight, take them out. You might want to replace the odd one, because obviously if you take everything off all the way up and just have a couple on the top, the weight of the fruit can then sort of slide the whole thing down the cane or your support, and you'll end up with snapping the stem. So that's it, cordons done, dusted, etc. So moving on from them, we go on to the bush tomatoes, or the determinants as they're called. And as you can see, these got no leaves on them now. We're the end of July, so this is actually a little bit early for them to be balled. But as I said before, determinate tomatoes obviously form in a bush form, and we've put the strings round and tied them in. But they also produce all their crop in one hit, or basically you can see most of the fruits are ripe at the same time. So these are nearly at an end. The foliage was getting a bit grotty here and there, difficult to water, so it's time to just strip everything off and leave it as this and just pick the fruit as it comes. And that's it, they're done. The only thing I would say is there is a good variety of bush tomato. Not many people grow it. We're actually the only people who grow and produce the seed of it, which is a variety called Pixie. And even though it's the end of July, here we have some plants that we're just starting, and we will pot these up soon. These were started the end of June and have been potted up obviously, and we actually now have another fresh batch of seedlings that we'll soon be selling, because this is what's called a short day tomato. Most tomatoes you can't do this with, but Pixie you can, in that it will set fruit in very low light conditions and right through the winter, provided you can give it temperature. So in here we're going to pot these up. They're going to get to about the same size as these Pixies did, all the foliage, everything. We'll have a crop of fruits probably end of August, beginning of September, and the ones that we're now producing, we will have fruits from those September, October time, and then you can actually take cuttings off those, root them, grow them on the windowsill, and have a plant this sort of size, and have some nice little fruits. Fruits won't be as big, but have some fresh fruits for Christmas. So as bush tomatoes go, I personally think the best variety is Pixie, and that is why we made such an effort to actually rescue the variety, dehybridise it and stabilise it, and that's why we keep it going. So that's bush tomatoes all done. Finally, welcome to the world of mess. These are the pimpernifolias, which, as I said in the first clip, they just go absolutely crazy. There's not an awful lot you can do with them apart from sort of just tie them in. They're just a bit like a shaggy dog really. Absolutely loaded with fruit, as you can see. The foliage does get a bit messy and more air in there would be easier, but you just can't do anything with them, so just keep on picking the fruit. Kids love them. They drive you nuts picking so many fruits for so little in weight, but they are just fantastic flavour, really crunchy and lovely. So that's Pimpernel done as well. So really, that's what to do with your tomatoes from potting on right through to growing through the summer. I will do a clip a little bit later on saving seed, but that's tomatoes start to finish.